The evidence for reincarnation is overwhelming. What if your birthmarks were actually scars from a previous life? What if your deepest, most irrational phobias were echoes of how you once died? These aren't just late-night philosophical questions. For thousands of people, these feel like lived realities. Take 2-year-old James Leininger. He started having violent nightmares about being trapped in a burning, crashing airplane. But he claimed they weren't just dreams. He said they were memories. This is just one of thousands of documented cases that raise the question, could your consciousness be far older than your body? While mainstream science remains deeply skeptical, the collected stories present a profound puzzle that challenges our everyday understanding of life and death. The thesis. For over half a century, researchers at places like the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies have been meticulously documenting these accounts. This work kicked off with Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist who poured his career into investigating children who claimed to remember past lives. He and his successor, Dr. Jim Tucker, have since compiled a database of over 2,500 anecdotal cases. Now, these aren't just vague feelings of déjà vu. They are often filled with incredibly specific details. Names, places, and events the children couldn't possibly know through normal means. We're going to explore some of the most compelling cases and the strange patterns that have emerged from decades of research. Part 1. The Deep Dive Case Study. The Pilot Who Came Back. Perhaps the most famous and scrutinized case in the Western world is that of James Leininger. Born to a Christian family in Louisiana, James's story started with terrifying night terrors when he was about 2. He'd thrash in his sleep, screaming, "Airplane crash! Plane on fire! Little man can't get out." As you can imagine, his parents, Bruce and Andrea, were baffled and terrified. The nightmares got more intense and even started bleeding into his waking life. He'd obsessively crash his toy planes into the coffee table. His parents noticed he knew a startling amount about World War II-era aircraft. He'd talk about a drop tank and correctly identify a Japanese plane as a Zero. When his mom pointed to the bottom of a toy plane and called it a bomb, James corrected her. "That's a drop tank, Mommy." He knew that pilots flew Corsairs and that they often got flat tires when they landed. The most chilling moment came when James started signing his drawings, James 3, telling his parents he was the third James. He talked about his old plane, a Corsair, that he flew off a boat. When his dad asked for the boat's name, James replied instantly, "Natoma." Bruce Leininger, a self-proclaimed skeptic, decided to start digging. He discovered that a small World War II escort carrier named the USS Natoma Bay was in fact active in the Pacific and had fought in the battle for Iwo Jima. As James's statements grew more specific, his father's skepticism started to fade. James said his old name was also James, and that he'd been killed by the Japanese. He remembered a friend on the Natoma Bay named Jack Larson. Through military records, Bruce confirmed that a pilot named Jack Larson had indeed served on the USS Natoma Bay. Even more stunning, he found only one pilot from that ship had died during the Iwo Jima campaign, a 21-year-old from Pennsylvania named James M. Houston, Jr. His plane was shot down by Japanese anti-aircraft fire on March 3, 1945. His engine was hit, the plane caught fire, and it crashed into the water. Just as James Leininger had described in his nightmares. Proponents, like researcher Dr. Jim Tucker, argue the timeline is crucial here. They state that documentation shows James was making these specific claims long before his family had ever heard of James Houston, Jr. or the USS Natoma Bay. For them, The sheer volume of verified details makes simple coincidence seem like a statistical longshot. However, the case is far from airtight and has drawn heavy criticism. Skeptical investigators have raised serious questions about information leakage, suggesting young James could have been exposed to documentaries or conversations about World War II. Critics argue that even subconscious parental influence could have shaped his statements over time. They also point to the fact that some of the family's original notes were lost, and the accounts were recorded retrospectively, which makes the timeline less certain than proponents claim. Despite these very valid criticisms, the Leininger case remains a cornerstone of the debate around reincarnation, a puzzling story that, for many, hints at the survival of personality after death. The transition and the James Leininger story isn't one of a kind. Across the thousands of cases documented by researchers, some stunning patterns have emerged. Let's look at the most compelling types of claims they've found. Part 2. The patterns of evidence. Evidence number 1. Birthmarks and physical traits. One of the most visually striking categories of evidence involves birthmarks. In his book, Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect, Dr. Ian Stevenson presented dozens of cases where children were born with marks that seemed to match the wounds, often fatal ones, of the person whose life they claimed to remember. In one case from Thailand, a boy claimed he was the reincarnation of his uncle, who was killed by a shotgun blast to the back of the head. The boy was born with a large, misshapen patch of lighter skin and thin hair at the exact location of the fatal wound. In another, a boy in Turkey remembered being a man killed by a shotgun blast to the right side of his chest. This boy was born with a cluster of small birthmarks that mirrored a shotgun pellet pattern. Stevenson was able to get autopsy reports for some of these cases and found the birthmarks corresponded to the wounds. While proponents argue this pattern defies simple chance, mainstream science points to coincidence, cultural factors, and reporting bias as more likely explanations, as there is no accepted biological mechanism to connect them. Evidence number 2. Verifiable, obscure knowledge. Beyond physical marks, some of the most powerful claims come in the form of knowledge a child couldn't have learned normally. The case of Ryan Hammonds is a perfect example. Starting at age 4, Ryan would direct imaginary movies and cry, begging his mother to take him home to Hollywood. He insisted he used to be someone else. Over time, he gave dozens of specific details about this supposed past life. He said he worked for an agency where people changed their names, that he danced on Broadway, and that he had a big house with a pool. He remembered odd details, like drinking something called True Aid and knowing a senator from New York. He said he died in a city with sun in its name and wished he could have seen his children grow up. Ryan's mother, Cindy, decided to check out a book about old Hollywood from the library. While flipping through it, Ryan stopped her at a photo from the 1932 film Night After Night. He pointed to one man and said, "Mama, that's George." We did a picture together. Then he pointed to another man, an uncredited extra, and said, "And Mama, that's me." That's who I was. The man he pointed to was Marty Martin, a former movie extra who became a powerful Hollywood agent. Martin had, in fact, danced on Broadway, lived in a house with a pool, and had a daughter. He died in 1964 in Los Angeles, a city with sun in its name. Dr. Jim Tucker's investigation later confirmed 55 separate statements Ryan made about Martin's life. Even Martin's own daughter was shocked, confirming details she thought no one outside the family could have known. Evidence number 3. Xenoglossy, unlearned languages. Perhaps the most extraordinary claim in these studies is xenoglossy, the ability to speak a language one has never been taught. However, this phenomenon is extremely rare and scientifically controversial. Dr. Stevenson did investigate a few instances where people, sometimes under hypnosis, began speaking a foreign language. But critics, including linguists and psychologists, argue that these cases lack rigorous proof and can often be explained by cryptomnesia, recalling a language heard years earlier without realizing it. To date, there isn't a single case of xenoglossy that is widely accepted by the scientific community as genuine evidence for reincarnation. Addressing skepticism. Of course, this entire field is met with healthy and necessary skepticism. The most common objections are that these kids are simply misremembering things they saw on TV, are being coached by their parents, or that the stories are a product of cultural conditioning, especially since many cases come from cultures where reincarnation is a core belief. Researchers like Stevenson and Tucker were well aware of these criticisms. They tried to design their methods to address them by documenting a child's statements before trying to verify them, to keep the story from being shaped to fit the facts. They interviewed witnesses separately and investigated families for any source of information leakage or fraud. Proponents sometimes use an idea known as the white crow argument. If you believe all crows are black, you only need to find one white crow to challenge that belief. They argue if just one of these thousands of cases is genuine, it could change everything. However, the scientific community's response is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. So far, that standard hasn't been met. A compelling story, no matter how moving, isn't the same as repeatable, verifiable data. Conclusion. So where does all this leave us? On one hand, we have over 2,500 documented anecdotal cases from a university research division. We have patterns of children reporting specific, verifiable-sounding details about people who have died. We have birthmarks that seem to align with fatal wounds. And we have complex cases like James Leininger's, which, despite valid criticism, remain profoundly difficult to explain. This isn't about religious dogma. It's about looking at a collection of human experiences gathered over decades and asking what they might mean. These stories aren't scientific proof, and the mainstream view holds that consciousness is a product of the brain, ending when the brain dies. But the research presents a fascinating puzzle. Are these cases evidence of a life beyond this one? Or are they complex psychological events shaped by family, culture, and coincidence? The research doesn't give us a final answer, only a fascinating and profound question. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below.